Well, hello and welcome to this brand new series, much anticipated, but finally we are here at the source of Tweed water high up in the Moffat Hills in the Scottish borders. And this is the start of the series exploring the course of the River Tweed and how it's played a part in the lives of the people of the past and the people living here today. I am beginning with the River Tweed, as it is the most northerly of the rivers flowing through the north of England. And the Tweed is slightly different to any of the other rivers that I intend to visit over the course of the next few years. It's first of all different because it's the only river that flows through two separate nations, those being England and Scotland, of course. The word Tweed comes from the old Scottish Gaelic language and means border. And for many centuries, it actually formed the border between the two nations of England and Scotland. It's recorded as being 97 miles long from its source here in Tweed's Well to the estuary at Berwick upon Tweed. The official source of the River Tweed is up there on that hillside behind me. As is the case with many river sources, both in Scotland and England, the direct visual line of a river does not always provide the source of it. Here at the source of the Tweed, the direct line of the stream begins as Coarse Burn, which then joins with the Tweed after a few hundred metres or so. The recorded official source of the Tweed is a spring on the side of this hill. It flows down to meet Coarse Burn at right angles. The reason this boggy area is called Tweed's Well is because, as you can see, several small streams flow down into this basin. To be honest, any one of them could be called the Tweed source. Anyway, from this boggy basin, the Tweed exits and begins its journey eastward. The Tweed, of course, is extremely important to Scotland's ecology, both from a tourist point of view and the salmon fishing, of course, which is reported to be one of the best in the world. So another reason why the River Tweed is so important to Scotland and also the north of England. During the period of the Romano-Britons, and even before that, there was no concept of England and Scotland as separate nations. Britain was a land consisting of various tribes amalgamated from various European and Gaelic origins. It's a common misconception that Hadrian's Wall was the first border between the two nations, but this is not the case. When the Romans invaded the southeast of Britain in 43 AD, they needed time to consolidate their forces before expanding north. It was in 79 AD that the Romans began moving north under the command of General Agricola. By 84 AD, General Agricola had established forts along the southern edge of the Highlands from Greenock to Stonehaven. After General Agricola was recalled to Rome in 84 AD, the Romans withdrew to a more defensible line across the Fourth Clyde Valley. This line was the northern boundary of the Roman Empire until around 130 AD, when they were forced to retreat behind Hadrian's Wall. The wall, begun in 122 AD, was finished by 128 AD. After Hadrian came the Emperor Antoninus. He ordered the building of a turf and earthwork wall across the Fourth Clyde Valley in 142 AD, and that became the northern boundary of the empire once more. Only 20 years later, the Antonine Wall was abandoned, and once again the Romans retreated back to Hadrian's Wall, where they remained until the Romans left Britain in 410 AD. By installing those two barriers which ran right across Britain, the Romans unintentionally created the idea of a separation between the area of England and Scotland. When the Romans left in 410 AD, the Fourth Clyde Valley continued to be regarded as a separation between the two regions, and that pretty much remained the case until 927 AD. In 973 AD, King Kenneth II of Scotland had to give homage to the English King Edgar, and for that homage paid, he was granted the area of Lothian, and that would have brought the border of England and Scotland south to here in the Tweed Valley. King Edgar, though, didn't honour his promise, and the area was left disputed until 1018, when the Scots decided to claim what was rightfully theirs and defeated the English at the Battle of Carham, which is near Coldstream. And we'll visit Coldstream later in the series and talk more about that particular battle then. That battle made the River Tweed as the recognised border, and in 1237 AD it was legally established in the signing of the Treaty of York, and that was between King Henry III of England and Alexander II of Scotland. The land to the west of the Tweed, between Langham and the Solway Firth, was known as the Debatable Lands, and that was still contested until 1552. In that same year, both nations established what was called the Scots Dyke across those debatable lands, and deciding the boundary once and for all. The Scots Dyke is a 5-kilometre stretch of earthwork ditch and remains the border to this day. The border in the east changed several times after 1237 because of all the various battles that happened in Berwick. The disputes at Berwick were finally settled in 1482 after an English invasion of Scotland, and the border was moved north to end at a place called Marshall Meadows on the east coast. That meant that Berwick was now an English town, where it has remained to this day. The official border between England and Scotland today is in most part a long way south of the River Tweed, extending from Gretna, following a diagonal direction northeastward towards the Cheviot Hill. From there it turns 90 degrees and travels north to Birgham, where the border meets with the River Tweed. After following the river to Paxton, it moves north again, skirting Berwick, and finishes at Marshall Meadows Bay on the northeast coast. So we've established the significance of the Tweed in its role as a border, but it also has significant importance to Scotland, not just to the salmon fishing and the tourism, but of course it lends its name to that famous Scottish woolen product called tweed. The fertile valleys of the Tweed provided a perfect home for the sheep farmers, and the fast-flowing river provided power to drive the woolen mills. The geology here in the Upper Tweed Valley is heavily folded sedimentary rocks formed around 500 million years ago, and those have been carved away by the glaciers of the last ice age to form these perfect U-shaped valleys, which you'll see all the way along our journey along the river. The valley floor is deep in glacial debris, which is a mixture of boulders, clay, and it's a term called scree. So as the ice sculpts the rocks away and then the glacier melts, it deposits all of that material that it's carrying on the valley floor. And of course the rivers and streams, all the streams and rivers that join the Tweed, have cut further V-shaped ravines into that valley floor. One of the rocks quarried here is slate, though I'm reliably informed that it's very much inferior to Welsh slate. The period prior to records being written, often referred to by historians as prehistory, saw many settlements here. Once the last ice age had retreated, those very first Mesolithic people, known for their nomadic habits as wandering hunter-gatherers, preferred to settle here. Their camps and settlements have been discovered and investigated all along the hillsides in the valley. When we get a few miles further to the east, we will see a startling example of this at Tinnis Castle. The land that I'm standing on to deliver this first part of the narrative is Hawkshaw Farm, and it belongs to Neil Manning, and he is the only hill farmer left in the Upper Tweed Valley. All of the others have gone, mostly because the Forestry Commission have purchased the land and forced most of the farmers off. He lives in that house there you can see behind me, and it was once the coaching inn before the main road was built, just on the back of his farmhouse. The coaching road, and I'm just going to turn around here to show you, this track behind me was the main drovers road over the hills to Moffat, where cattle would be sold at market in Moffat and Carlisle. So it was a very important route. If I just spin back around, you can see the track up to the house there, but the farmhouse was the actual coaching inn. And this is the very first bridge across the Tweed, used every day by Neil to herd his sheep over the river. The river at this point is less than a metre wide and just a gentle trickle.
Come by. Rally was Tweed. Fudge, come by. More Tweed. Tweed. Come by, Fudge. Come by. Stay there. Rally. Lie down. Lie down. Rally, come on up. Fudge, rally, Fudge, come on up. Rally. Rally. Rally, Pep. Moss on the bike. Rally, Moss. Rally, Moss. Rally, Moss. Come on up. Rally, Moss. Steady. Stand. Stand. Walk up. Walk up. Stand. Come on up. Come on up. Hold. Lie down.
As we'll see as we progress along the river valley, most of the industries, like the woolen industry, that helped form the communities and livelihoods of people living here have long since gone. And that is because the Forestry Commission, as I mentioned earlier, have bought up most of the land, not only to harvest trees, but also to install wind farms. In between those forestry plantations are people who have found a new way of living, a new livelihood, and they bring much vigour and life to the valley, but not always apparent to those passing through, because they're tucked away on the hillsides in all the little valleys and cubby holes. And we're going to be very fortunate in meeting some of those people along the way. From here, the metre-wide river begins winding its way down the valley, heading north. It finds its way between the forestry fir trees, leaving the roadside to negotiate its first obstacle, a small hillock. As the Tweed rounds the hill, it is joined by a burn called Core Water. This is the first major tributary to join the Tweed, and from here the river widens steadily. So what began as a stream barely a metre wide is now a shallow river some 2 to 3 metres wide. The A701 road and the river meet again here and stay in close proximity for the next 14 miles. Every few hundred metres joined by more small streams, and of course up here in Scotland they are called burns. The cottage behind me belonged to the Horn family, who ran a successful sheep rearing business here called Hawkshaw Sheep, and it's still marked on Google Maps, in fact. However, the early part of this year their tenancy was not renewed because the landowner has given the land over to the Forestry Commission, who plan to put another wind farm here. Sadly, leaving only Neil Manning at the head of the valley, the Horn family had to move into Peebles and find work there, meaning that their business, which had thrived here for generations, was gone forever. Having spoken to them, they informed me that when the farm was running, they'd had flocks of Scots blackface sheep, which produced a very coarse wool, and that suited the original tweed cloth, because back in the Middle Ages, for example, the material needed to be hard wearing. However, as the modern woolen industry grew in the Victorian period, for example, they needed to find sheep with a more workable wool, softer and easier to work with. And so they moved towards Shetland and Hebridean sheep. But as I say, that sadly it's all gone now, and it's just another shame that an industry as old as this has gone forever. The bridge you can see behind me is brand new, and if you watch the drone footage for this particular spot, it was still under construction when I was here a few weeks ago. It's now completed. It's all looking rather smart. From here, the river hugs the roadside for another mile or so before we reach the next thriving business in this Upper Tweed Valley. So here we are, just a couple of miles from the last location at the, the home of Campbell's Fudge. And the business is run by Stephen and Jane Edge. Their main shop is in Moffat, but the business began here with Jane's grandma, Granny Campbell, and she started making fudge and what they call Scottish tablet. It's very similar to Kendal mint cake if you've ever had that on a visit to the Lake District, but it's slightly different, and it's called Scottish tablet, and it was made here on the farm. and then when production was demanded in greater numbers, they moved the production down to Moffat, especially when they started making chocolate, because chocolate doesn't like condensation. And of course, they get a lot of that up here in the Tweed Valley with the changeable weather. So it was actually better to move the production down to Moffat. So most of that is done there, but they still produce some of the fudge here, and that is to supply their local neighbours that still demand that being made here. The fudge that they make here on the farm and down in the shop in Moffat is still that same recipe that Granny Campbell invented all those years ago. I'm actually standing just next to Carlow Bridge, which is the bridge which takes the road into Tweedsmuir village, which we'll be looking at in a moment. But as you can see here, this is the first time the River Tweed meets a rock obstacle and forms its first waterfall. An absolutely beautiful spot. So here down in the gorge itself, is evidence of the slate rock which is prevalent in this particular part of the river. I'm here now in the churchyard, or kirkyard as I should say, in the village of Tweedsmuir, and about a mile downriver from the last stopping point, the river is joined by two streams, both fed by reservoirs. The Fluid Reservoir and the Tala Reservoir, and the two streams are Fluid Water and Tala Water. At the same location we come across the first proper village, and as I said, it's called Tweedsmuir. A muir in the Scottish dialect is the same as the word moor in the English dialect. The bridge we've just seen, as I mentioned earlier, is called Carlow Bridge, and as you can see, it's a stone arched construction, and it was built in 1783 by James and Alexander Noble. It's been repaired and reconstructed many times through the years due to wear and tear, and also damage by the river when it floods. But this village of Tweedsmuir, which might seem very small and insignificant, it sits in a very important Bronze Age and Stone Age landscape, filled with the remnants of many roundhouses, standing stones, burial sites and hill forts. It's thought that these early people began settling here around 6,500 years BC. Lots of artefacts have been found here over the years, but perhaps the most astonishing was when a hill walker found a yew bow. So that's a bow for a bow and arrow made out of yew wood, and it was apparently dropped by an ancient hunter into a peat bog where it was preserved, and they estimate by carbon dating that that bow is at least 4,000 years old. It belongs to the Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, but as far as I'm aware, it's currently on display at the Moffat Museum in Moffat, which is just to the west of where we are. It's thought that the period after those early people, that the valley was occupied by Celtic Druids, although not much in the way of written records exist at all. As we will discover, though, several families living in this Upper Tweed Valley today still follow those early Celtic beliefs and traditions, living as close as possible to nature. Any written records still surviving began in the medieval period with the Fraser and the Tweeden families. In this particular series, I don't wish to get too deep into Scottish clans. There have been countless programmes and YouTube films made on such matters. But because the main focus of this entire series is about the river and the people living next to the river and their lives and livelihoods. However, it is worth explaining who those two families were, because they influenced a lot of that early medieval life here in the Upper Tweed. The first Fraser was a Frenchman, a French nobleman in fact, coming to Britain around the time of the Norman conquest. The original spelling of his name was Frazel. By 1160, that name had morphed into Fraser, and records show the Fraser family gifting a church in Kelso to the abbey there. We will visit Kelso later in the series, of course, but the Frasers built one of the first tower houses here, known as Oliver Castle. Today, the site where the castle once stood is hidden by a small copse of trees and is not visible to the eye. The Tweeden family we'll hear much more about later in the series, but they were a different kettle of fish altogether. But the Fraser family twice intermarried with the Tweeden family through the centuries, and they're still linked through marriage to this day. During the wars with England, Simon Fraser fought alongside William Wallace in the Battle of Roslin in 1302, where the English were defeated. And then again with Robert the Bruce in 1306, where Simon Fraser was captured and executed in the same way that William Wallace was, hung, drawn and quartered. A church in Scotland is called a kirk, and the kirk here at Tweedsmuir was built in 1874, designed by a John Lascelles, and that replaced an older kirk built in 1648. You can see the present church there just behind me. But at that particular time, there was no bridge either over the Tweed water or Taller water. So in times of when the river was flooded, there would be periods where the parishioners could not attend the church here. The kirk here is quite striking, with its grey stone walls and red dressed stone edges. In parallel with Henry VIII's break with the Catholic Church in England, the church here in Scotland also went through a Reformation in 1560, and that was headed by a John Knox. The new Church of Scotland followed a more Presbyterian ideal. I don't want to go too deep into this subject matter either, but the reason for making mention of it at this stage is because the whole of this Upper Tweed Valley provided a venue for the Covenanters, as they were called. The Covenanters were members of a political and religious movement who supported the Presbyterian Church of Scotland. In the kirkyard here is a monument to John Hunter, who was a leading member of the Covenanters and shot by a dragoon guard in 1685. Just a short distance the other side of the village crossroads, on the road up to Fluid Reservoir, is a group of standing stones at the side of the road. The largest is known as the Giant Stone. They are thought to have been part of a much larger Druid circle at one time, but the carbon dating research proves they predate the Druids at 2000 BC. A local legend has become associated with the stone. The legend goes that an extraordinary tall man used his unusual height to intimidate the local people, earning himself the reputation as the Giant. A villager named Little John, who was a good marksman with a bow and arrow, laid in wait for the giant hiding behind this stone. As the giant passed by, he was struck by the arrow and killed, and the legend has remained to this day. The stone isn't that huge. As you can see, I'm standing next to it. My height's approximately 5'10", and it's coming up to my middle. So as I say, it's not that it's a giant stone, it's just that the chap who killed the giant hid behind it. And as I said before, there are a lot of standing stones in the Upper Tweed Valley, especially around Tweedsmuir, and these three stones here are all that's left of this particular collection. Whether they were Druid or not, there's some argument, but they're certainly they're not deposited by a glacier. They've been manhandled into these positions. From the crossroads in Tweedsmuir village, you can access both reservoirs. The Tala Reservoir was built first in 1897. A rapidly expanding Edinburgh needed water, and the land was purchased by the Edinburgh Water Company. An earthwork dam was built across the valley, and Tala water was allowed to flood, forming the reservoir. The grand looking building next to the dam, which you might just be able to see in the distance behind me, was the headquarters of the company, built in a Renaissance style. Features of Renaissance buildings include the use of mathematically precise ratios of height and width combined with symmetry and proportion. And that's straight out of the textbook, by the way. The Fruid Reservoir, which is just over the hill there to the west, that valley was flooded in 1968 as a reserve water supply to the Tala Reservoir here. A very large header tank, you could say. A tunnel through the hill connects the two reservoirs, so if the Tala falls low here, the water is pumped through the hillside to top up the Tala, which it then supplies Edinburgh, which is about 28 miles north of here. The dam at Fruid is an earthwork dam as well. Many Bronze Age sites are submerged below the waterline here, so every time the reservoir does fall low, there's a mad rush by archaeologists to examine the sites. In particular, the remains of two roundhouses are the focus for their attention at present. From Tweedsmuir village, the river continues down the valley and is then crossed by two very interesting bridges. The first is quite a substantial structure called Glenrusco Bridge. It consists of a steel gantry suspended between two stone quadrant-shaped towers. This carried a railway built specifically to facilitate the building of Tala Dam in 1897. The railway ran from the dam to a junction in Wracken, which is a bit further down the valley. And when the construction of the dam was finished, the railway was removed and the pipe carrying the water from the dam to Edinburgh was laid across the top of the bridge. The second bridge is fairly recent and called Hearthstanes Bridge. It replaced an older weak bridge and the concrete piers of the old bridge are still visible beneath the new one. Just a little further down the river from Hearthstanes Bridge is the Crook Inn on the side of the A701. This is a very famous inn in the Upper Tweed Valley and used to be a drover's inn. Drovers were men who moved cattle or livestock from one place to another. Here in Tweedsmuir, the cattle would have been moved along the valley for sale in Moffat or Carlisle in the lowlands to the west of here. In 1604, it was one of 3 inns to receive a licence declared by James VI of Scotland in an attempt to regulate these remote drinking places. They were known as tippling houses, and it is one of the oldest still standing in Scotland. The word crook comes from the Scottish dialect crook, which is the hook that the large cooking pot would hang on over the fire. Another meaning to that name came from crook, as in a shepherd's crook, the walking stick with a curled iron head used to hook up wandering and stray sheep. In 1752, the A701 became a turnpike road, meaning that travellers had to pay a toll to travel along it. It was one of the main routes from Edinburgh to Moffat and Dumfries. The Crook Inn became a staging post for travellers at this time and extremely popular. One of its famous visitors in the past was Robbie Burns. He wrote the scurrilous poem Willie Wassell's Wife while staying here. In 1835, the inn was converted and modernised. During the building of Tala Dam, a railway siding brought the workers to the Crook Inn. James Young of Edinburgh was the main contractor building the dam, and he part owned the Crook Inn at that time. He installed a railway station here, more or less at the door of the inn, and that was part of his plan, so that the wages he paid to his workers got spent in his inn, thereby recouping his losses. In the 1930s, the new owner refurbished the inn in an Art Deco style with curved windows and a balcony. The inn closed its doors in 2006 for the last time and was initially put up for sale by the owner for a housing development, threatening the destruction of over 400 years of heritage. The local people of Tweedsmuir strongly objected and formed the Tweedsmuir Community Company and managed to purchase it for £160,000, saving it from extinction. It is hoped that future funding will see it restored to its former glory. In the meantime, there's a thriving roadside cafe called the Wee Crook Cafe, offering sustenance to the modern traveller. Midweek, during the winter period, the Wee Crook Inn is closed to travellers. But at all other times, it's well worth stopping here, not only to sample the excellent food and drink here, but also right across the river from here, directly opposite, is a field of reindeer. And with a decent pair of binoculars, you get an excellent view of these majestic animals. Just another mile along the river from Hearthstanes Bridge is Polmood Bridge, and you can see it there just behind me. There's work ongoing, so the background noise are the guys fixing the galvanised decking. The bridge takes a private road over the river to Polmood House. A peel tower once stood there as part of a chain of peel towers running right down the valley. It belonged to the Hunter family I mentioned earlier in connection with the Covenanters. The earliest record shows the tower's existence as early as 1057. That was 9 years before the Norman invasion of England. And between 996 and 1004, Kenneth III ruled Scotland, and he used to visit Polmood House regularly. He was a keen hunter, and the deer and wild boar were plentiful in the Caledonian forest, which covered this whole area. During heavy fog, the king got lost on one such hunting trip, and he eventually came across a cottage in the valley. Knocking on the door, it was opened by a beautiful girl known to the locals as Bonnie Bertha of Badlew. Her mother had died during childbirth, so she lived with her father, a shepherd. The king fell immediately in love with her and visited her whenever he was at Polmood. The king was married, but it was thought to be a loveless marriage with no children. The king had Bertha moved to Polmood House so he could keep her as his mistress. and not long after she bore him a child, and the king loved them both very dearly. Other members of Kenneth's family opposed his claim to the throne, and there were frequent battles amongst the family members. During one of these frequent battles, while Kenneth was away, his queen ordered her loyal servants to travel here to Polmood and kill Bertha and her son. When Kenneth returned from battle, he was absolutely distraught, and not being able to accept the news, he had both graves of his lover and son exhumed to prove that they were both dead. The history books suggest that Kenneth was killed in yet another battle the following year, 1005, but local legend records that Kenneth returned from the battle and died here at Polmood, broken-hearted. He was known as Kenneth the Grim, and that might have been why. The hunting lodge and any history relating to Kenneth III has long since gone, and Polmood House today is a private residence and not open to the public. And there is the bridge completed with its brand new deck and finely painted gantry steelwork. Well, that's the end of this first episode in this brand new series. My goodness, has it taken some effort to get done. Fortunately, we've had a window of weather from the end of August right through to the beginning of November and of 2024 I'm talking about, and we've managed to get at least the first 3 episodes filmed and in the bag, ready to release. You're watching episode 1 now in January of 2025, and there are 2 more episodes to come, filmed at the end of 2024. In the new year, we hope as soon as the weather's decent, we'll continue with the filming from Peebles and follow the river ever eastward towards its estuary. Anyway, that's what's to come. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode. If you have, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already done so. Don't forget, there's that blue donate link at the top of my homepage if you want to financially help the channel. And if not, then please keep supporting the channel in all the normal ways. Liking, watching it right through, sharing the links with your friends and family, and as I say, just supporting the channel in whatever way you can. So from here on the banks of the River Tweed, I'll wish you the very best of health, as always, my very best wishes, and I'll see you all in the next episode very soon. But goodbye for now.